Hello and welcome to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. This is your host, Ashley from Ashley Taylor Wellness. On this podcast, we talk about all things beauty, health, wellness, and optimization. Being a high maintenance hippie represents not being boxed in, as I strongly believe that one size does not fit all. I'm a nurse turned coach, and I have learned so much about both conventional and alternative options, and I want to help you expand your options. I'm here to inspire you to learn new ways to improve your quality of life and to take your power back. I'm so excited that you're here, so let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. Today's guest is Alyssa Stefanson. She's a somatic practitioner and podcaster. She is on the Awake and Winning podcast with Kaylor Betts. And also she has her own podcast called Waking the Wild Woman. And I'm really excited for the topics that we're going to discuss today regarding the nervous system, attachment, and why this is so important for our health. Has a lot to do with what I do in coaching, but also Alyssa. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's funny because I was such a huge fan of you during COVID after following Kaylor and listening to your podcast conversation. So it's really cool to be on your podcast today. And I'm such a huge fan of what you do, everything that you share. And like I was mentioning earlier, everything you're doing with the Oura ring, which is really cool. So I'm such a fan of your work. So happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited. And I'm glad you mentioned the Oura ring because for a lot of people, they see it as a way that they're outsourcing their power. For me, it has not been that. If anything, it showed me that I need more rest, that I'm on all the time. And I felt that to get to where I wanted to be, I had to be pushing. So it really gave me permission to slow down. I don't know how long you've had it, but what has it taught you so far?
Yeah, I actually just got mine a couple of weeks ago. And the exact same thing. It's like I thought I was pretty like I felt like I was really connected to my body, but it just gave me that data to actually see.
Yes.
Because sometimes we don't even notice how stressed we are until we actually see the data, right? And especially sleep. Like my sleeps, I used to sleep like a baby. And then recently I moved into a new place. I got a new bed. My entire life changed because I have, new jobs. I'm on Kaylor's podcast. I'm working with him. I'm working with other teams. And it was a lot of change. Overwhelm is overwhelm, even if it is positive, right? Doesn't matter whether it's like a negative event or like positive, like overwhelm is overwhelm. So my body was not adapting because I could tell with my sleeps, and it was nice to actually see the data. And then I just started like really focusing on slowing down, really being more present in the moment, really making sure that I'm taking that time to have a proper sleep routine before bed. I had a really great morning routine, but nothing made more of a difference than actually taking care of that sleep routine before I actually went to bed, making sure I'm turning off all of the lights, having the red lights on, just all of these little things, right, that made such a big difference. And yeah, my sleep's definitely improved when I actually started paying attention to it. But sometimes when we don't pay attention to it, when we're not actually seeing the data, then we don't really focus on it. So it's really helped me hold myself accountable for those things.
Yeah, in a loving way. And that's what I want people to realize. If it makes you feel anything other than you're learning, you're empowering yourself to do what's right for you, then maybe it wouldn't be helpful. But I think it's just how we look at it. And instead of saying my data's bad, I look at it as an opportunity to improve something. There's something that whether I'm experiencing physiological symptoms yet, my body is trying to communicate. And one thing that's really interesting, check this out under sleep, but your resting heart rate when it's lowest is a metric that I don't think is talked about a lot. And so that should be lowest in our midpoint of sleep, higher right when we go to bed, higher when we wake up. And a lot of people will have this downward slope pattern, or it's called the hills or uplands. And that can indicate that we're stressed, even if we're meditating during the day, even if we're walking, there could be a gap that we're not aware of. So that's something that was really helpful. And then you mentioned a nighttime routine. So I take you to be a person who's very aware and you practice what you preach. But why would a nighttime routine make a difference for a person regarding the nervous system, stress, and even sleep quality? What is that doing for a person?
Yeah, well, I mean, just giving us that time to actually really activate our parasympathetic nervous system. Because often it's like and I have a bad habit of this, I'm not perfect. I can get caught up in work, right?
Mhm.
Like I love what I do. I love working. I can work late hours. And my body is still in that sympathetic, that fight or flight response. It's engaged, right? So,
Mhm.
if I don't actually allow myself time to discharge some of that energy, so we don't want to go directly into activating our parasympathetic nervous system right away, because sometimes we actually need to discharge some of that energy. So I need to, get some sort of movement of it. If I've been in front of the screen, like working with clients all day long, a lot of times my
Mhm.
body just needs to move, right? So I need to discharge some of that energy. Then I can activate my parasympathetic nervous system. So do maybe some, controlled breathing, maybe some meditating before bed. And it allows me, yeah, just get a deeper sleep. So my body's actually repairing itself during sleep, because that is when we heal, right? If we're not giving our body an opportunity to actually heal and rest, then it's just going to lead to burnout.
Definitely. And for sleep, a lot of people who are very, very busy during the day, maybe they work 40, 60, 80-hour weeks, and they're not willing or ready to change that. Well, how you spend the first 30 minutes and last 30 minutes of your day is going to be really, really important, because that is your time, and the sleep quality. All of that makes a big difference. So why couldn't a person go from go, go, go right to sleep? Why would that be challenging?
Yeah. So I'm sure all of us can relate going to bed and having your mind just racing and not being able to stop thinking, right? Thinking about what you're doing the next day, like things that aren't even important that you don't need to deal with when you're going to bed. So, what your system is saying to you when we're in high states of sympathetic, right? So, that's our fight or flight response. So, there's different levels of sympathetic. So, we can be a level 1 to 10. So, 10 is actually saying that there's a tiger right in front of you, right? And then a lower level of sympathetic, it's saying the tiger is a while away. We have time to escape. So, if you're at a super high level of sympathetic, your system's saying there's a tiger in front of you. Like, what are you doing? Why are you lying down? Get up,
Mhm.
right? So it's if we allow ourselves to actually get up and discharge some of that energy first, then we're actually able to activate the parasympathetic nervous system afterwards, right? We have to discharge some of that energy. How I like to explain it is so an animal in the wild, right? So say there's an impala and it's getting chased by a lion. What happens is that impala goes into the fight or flight response. So that is sympathetic, right? So
Mhm.
it's running. It has all that energy inside of its body. So if that impala can't escape, what happens then is it will drop to the ground and it'll go into the immobility response,
Mhm.
which is known as dorsal, if anyone's familiar with the polyvagal theory. And it actually like separates, like the consciousness actually leaves its body. So it doesn't have to feel the perpetual pain of being killed. So what happens often is if a lioness thinks that the animal is dead, what it will do is it'll go get the cubs so it can show it how to make its kill. So the impala will actually get up during that time and you'll actually see the animal shake it off. So what it's doing is it's finishing that energy discharge cycle, right?
Mhm.
So all of that sympathetic energy inside of its body was all of a sudden still stored in there because it dropped into the immobility response. So what it does is it shakes and then it goes back to the herd. If it didn't, it would be traumatized, right? So we have the exact same response as animals, but often we don't shake, right? Because it's not socially acceptable. And yeah, we're not dealing with like huge life-threatening events every single day, but we're dealing with daily stressors. Our body is still having that same physiological response. So it's like if we're go, 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 going like all throughout the day and we have all of that energy running inside of our body, of course our system can't relax. Like our system is saying you need to discharge some of that energy first. So that's why there's a lot of misconceptions when it even comes to regulating our nervous system, because everyone often thinks, oh, regulating my nervous system means like sitting down and like meditating or being still. Or doing, some sort of breath work. And those are great tools, absolutely, but they're not always the best tools depending on what state we're in. So
Yeah.
often when we're at super high level of sympathetic, we need to get some sort of movement in first, like shaking, swaying, moving our body to discharge some of that energy. And then you'll find that you'll be able to activate that parasympathetic state a lot more easier.
It's a really interesting example because I had a similar response. I did a functional cranial release. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. There's a balloon that went up my nose, and there's something that the doctor squeezes and it puts pressure on the dura mater, meaning tough mother. And I had tears and emotions. One woman who did it, I thought she was having an orgasm or something, but it was just like a powerful release. And then for about 45 minutes, I was shaking and I didn't understand what was happening. And someone came and he sat with me, and it was explained to me that this was my body letting go. And it was so powerful. For 10 days, I felt like a leaky faucet crying, but I had my first cervical orgasm after that. And it really showed me how much I was in this state. And I didn't even know, like in this, maybe you could call it functional freeze or just something where I was so tight and so tense that if you told me that, I would have said, I don't know what you're talking about. And you even mentioned um, the survival mode of, dissociating. In a lot of people are in their heads, not in their body. That's me because I did EMDR. And they're like, where do you feel it in your body? I'm like, well, what are they talking about? So I felt frustrated with that because I wasn't yet in my body. So for somebody who's in their head all the time, and maybe they don't even realize it, what might that typically look like? What do you see in people who are in that state?
And I think the majority of our culture is in our heads, right? That when I first actually started getting into somatic work, I didn't even realize how disconnected I was from my body. And when I work with clients, the very first thing I get them to do, all I get them to do is say, start bringing awareness to how often you're actually in your body. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, just start noticing throughout the day, am I in my body or am I in my head? And people are always blown away by it because they don't realize how disconnected they are from their bodies. Often, like when in relationship with others, right, we can often leave our bodies if we don't feel safe. We have this inner surveillance called neuroception. It's our subconscious threat detector that is constantly looking out into the world and deciding if the people, places, and situations we encounter are safe, dangerous, or life-threatening. If it detects danger, it brings us into dysregulation. If it detects safety, it brings us into regulation. Only one thing brings our nervous system into regulation, and that is safety. And so often we don't even realize that we are dysregulated or dissociated or disconnected from our bodies because we're in our heads all the time and we're not even focusing on it. And I loved how you mentioned so many people don't realize, like I just shared how trauma is actually stored in our body, right? It gets stored in like tissues in our body. And what you experience, like even the orgasm, so many women have suppressed sexual energy.
Yeah.
And I actually had an experience at a somatic breathwork practitioner training last February. I tell everyone the story because it's so crazy. But during that session, so I had an insane release and just a little background about me.
Mm-hmm.
So why I even got into somatic work. So I battled with 16 years of addiction. I was in and out of multiple abusive relationships. And the last relationship was in was very, very violent. He really struggled with PTSD. He had done 2 tours in Afghanistan. So it was just a really horrific situation. He wasn't well. And so I left that situation and literally lost everything in my life. I lost my job. I had started my life over with no belongings. I went through a very intense spiritual awakening. And so I had thought that I had done a lot of healing work over the years. So I did a lot of cognitive stuff, which is important
Mm-hmm.
too, right? Like we need to do both. But 80% of nerve fibers send information from body to brain. And what I was experiencing was trauma was stored in my body, right? Like trauma happens at a physiological level first. So if someone were to come up behind you and grab you, you would have a physiological response first, then the emotion, and then the thought. But cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on the thoughts, right? The stories, which is actually just a byproduct of what's happening inside
Right.
of our bodies. Like trauma is actually happening inside of our bodies. So I actually started diving into somatic work because I was experiencing so many different health issues, like insomnia. I couldn't even leave my home for a long period of time. My hair was falling out. I was dropping like drastic amounts of weight. I had every symptom of PTSD, but I just didn't want to get diagnosed with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started diving into somatic work and I went to the somatic breathwork training. During the training, it was very loud because it was a whole bunch of practitioners. There's 40 practitioners in the room and everyone was yelling. Like it was really, really loud. cognitively, I wasn't scared, but my body started shaking and trembling. And I was like, oh my God. And I even had my hands over my face and my hands were shaking like crazy. And I'm like, this is kind of embarrassing because I didn't even expect to have that response. And it got so bad that I actually had to leave the room. And then I'm like, oh my God, I'm not even going to be able to be a breathwork practitioner. Like, I can't even handle yelling. My body is shaking. And so one of the facilitators came out and spoke to me and invited me. He said, have you ever used your voice like that? Like, have you ever yelled like that? And I'm like, I can't. Like, I just couldn't bring myself to express that anger.
Yeah.
And he's like, if it feels right, I invite you tomorrow to try using your voice. And I'm not about like forcing cathartic releases because that's not helpful. That can actually push us further back. But if you feel called to, there's nothing more powerful than your voice. So the next day during the breathwork training, again, I was doing a breathwork session. I was like in the experience, and all of a sudden my body's shaking again. And then I could just hear him inviting me to use my voice. So I'm like, fuck it. So I started screaming, like just screaming, like I was being murdered. And I felt called to do it. Like it didn't feel forced. Like I was
Hmm.
just screaming. And then all of a sudden I just like flipped over. Someone handed me a pillow. I was like screaming into the pillow. I was banging the pillow. So it's like I was like finishing that response that I didn't have a chance to in the past. And then all of a sudden, it was the craziest experience of my entire life. I just feel this energy running through my body, like life force energy running through my body. And so I flipped over. All of a sudden, just this energy is running through my body. I had a full body orgasm. Never
Wow.
experienced anything like it in my life. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, I felt peace. I felt bliss. I just felt like stillness, and the shaking was gone. And it was the craziest experience ever. But it goes to show like women, and a lot of times this actually happens with women in breath work, is we suppress our sexual energy because we've experienced sexual trauma in our lives, right? And so a lot of times through somatic work, we can often have this release of sexual energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that just came to mind is it's not safe to be sexual. And I think that was a huge belief that I had because it got me into a lot of trouble. I was 11 when I started exploring, and not with people that have my best interests. It wasn't empowered. It was desperately seeking for love, and maybe they'll love me back if I'm intimate with them. It wasn't about pleasure. It wasn't about connection. It was simply about being worthy, I suppose. And that really affected my ability to connect with my partner today. And that's something that I've really realized. I've been open about this on social media, and a lot of women say they struggle with orgasm. So I don't have a formal survey or anything, but do you see that to be pretty common with women who have experienced physical, mental, and or emotional trauma in some form, that letting go can be hard?
Oh, absolutely. And even for myself, I went through like I've been celibate now for 4.5 years.
Okay.
Because just like you, it's like sex was never about connection in the past, right? Or never about like my pleasure or my orgasm. It was all about like pleasing the man and being wanted and being accepted, right? So it's like we're so disconnected from that pleasure. And also it's demonized in our culture. And
Mhm.
I'm not like celibate because by any means am I demonizing sexuality. I think it's the most beautiful, sacred thing on
Yeah.
the planet, right? Like there's nothing that more powerful than like connecting with another person sexually. But it's like I was always in these unsafe relationship dynamics. And I never had like an orgasm. Like during that breathwork ceremony, what was really interesting was obviously my body got to such a place of safety. Like women need to be able to feel so safe, so surrendered, completely in their body to be able to really have an orgasm and relax. Like it takes a lot of like deep connection, trust, and vulnerability. Like that is the most vulnerable position that we could be in with a man, right? It's like it's
Yeah.
life or death. It really is, right? To be in that vulnerable position. So of course, it's like a lot of times women just don't fully feel safe or connected to their partner to be able to even bring themselves to have an orgasm. So really, it's about like coming back into your body and finding that safety within your body so that you can actually really start to experience pleasure again.
Yeah. So for me, when I first heard get out of your head into your body, I scoffed at it. Those were words to me. If I heard one more person say that, I was going to lose my cool and probably explode. But it's because I didn't understand what that meant. It was so foreign to me. So what are ways that you get out of your head and into your body? And I'll elaborate on that, but I want to hear what you have to say first.
And like the feminine is the body. So the masculine is a representation of the mind, and the feminine is a representation of the body. And we live in a very masculine dominated culture that pedestals masculinity. And that's why often when people would say things like get out of your head and your body, it was scoffed at. It's kind of like embarrassed, and we pedestal like masculinity and logic and reason, right? Over like emotions and sensations. So some ways to really just get into your body, and there's so many different ways. One of my favorites definitely is breath work. I absolutely love breath work, but even just movement, like moving and swaying your hips in a way that you haven't allowed yourself to before, right? Like just really allowing your body to move organically and like flow, like, just even you can just sit on the ground and just do like circles with your body, and just moving your hips can be really helpful. I find is one of my
Mhm.
favorite ways to get into my body. How about for you?
So breath work, yes. And I find that holotropic or like the really long sessions that are more than an hour, I don't particularly care for those because I think it's just more than what I can handle. Although I will say I did it one time in LA and I had gone to Peru and did an ayahuasca retreat and all that, and nothing happened. I didn't see anything. I came home, I don't know, it must have been 6 months later, and I did this breath work. And that was a more powerful psychedelic experience than drugs. I mean, that was insane to me. So I'll elaborate more, but why would breath work do that? What is it doing to your state that allows you to get out of your head and into your body?
Yeah, well, really long sessions like that, what you experience, I did do a 2 hour holotropic breath work and it was too intense for me because
Yeah.
our body's actually releasing DMT. And I've heard from a lot of people that it was actually more powerful than ayahuasca.
Yeah.
I prefer more of like the gentler somatic
Yeah.
approaches, which can just be so much just as beneficial, equally powerful, but it's much more gentle. So I prefer like doing shorter lengths of the deep belly breathing. So we are activating our sympathetic nervous system in that state. And I like to sprinkle in breath holds. And
Hmm.
then I also like to do nostril breathing because then we're activating our parasympathetic nervous system. So often that's why I really love somatic breath work. I'm a somatic breath work practitioner, somatic release. If you don't follow them on Instagram, their modality is we first activate our sympathetic nervous system. So you're doing the deep belly breathing. Then you're also sprinkling in breath holds. So this is called titration. So we're pendulating between a state of activation and then a state of rest and safety. Then we're breathing in through the nose and activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So we're going in and out of those different states, which can be really powerful. There's actually one of the most powerful somatic techniques, and it's very, very simple, and you can do it anywhere, is called pendulation. So if anyone's familiar with Peter Levine, if you've never heard of him, I highly recommend reading the book Waking the Tiger. He is a neurobiologist and he's the founder of somatic experiencing. And he's come up with these 12 different concepts. And one of the concepts is pendulation. It's pendulating between an area of tightness, constriction in your body, or overwhelm, say where you're feeling your anxiety, and then finding a place of safety. So often, for a lot of people, their place of safety is often they'll say their thighs. I get that a lot. Their thighs or their forearms. And a lot of times we'll feel constriction in like our neck, or we'll feel like the anxiety like in our chest, up our
Hmm.
throat. So what can be really helpful is putting all of your awareness in the area where you feel the tightness, the constriction, the overwhelm. Just be fully present with it for tolerable periods of time. So ideally, like maybe 90 seconds, and then going to that place of safety in your body. So the thighs, and going back and forth. And often you'll start to notice the overwhelm start to actually dissipate. Often people will find like the tightness in their shoulders starts to actually relax and it starts to dissipate. So that's a really powerful exercise to do that you can do anywhere. You can do it at
Yeah.
work when you're walking around. Yeah.
So it sounds like breathwork is able to facilitate a state change, multiple state changes. And I also love that you said tolerable periods because I use this example with clients. And I think I mentioned to you before we started recording, but we don't start bench pressing 240 pounds on day one. So tolerable periods, why would that be ideal versus it needs to be this certain amount because more is better? Why would tolerable periods be a better way to do it?
Yeah. Well, trauma is too much, too soon, too fast or too long for your nervous system to handle. So we don't heal the same way we were hurt. And I, like personally, my life was, I'd been through so much in my life, and we live in a society that we think like bigger, better, faster, stronger. And I was so hard on myself at the beginning of my healing process. And that was actually pushing me further back. There's so
Mhm.
much medicine and gentleness in just
Yes.
taking these small, tolerable steps, because that's actually how we heal our nervous system, is these just small, tolerable steps. And often we think that these exercises are boring. I get that all the time. I tell my clients, you will think that this is boring. You will think that you're not even doing anything, that this isn't making any difference. And then in 2 weeks, you'll be completely blown away. And it
Yeah.
happens every time. It's just these tiny little, like these small, tolerable steps, these simple exercises you can do absolutely anywhere
Mhm.
that you are. Like there's no excuse. You can't be too busy to do them, because you can do them anytime, anywhere. And they make a huge difference in your life. Like they really do. The tools work if you actually use them.
Mhm. Consistently. And once again, Aura has shown me, especially now that you can see stress and restorative time, when I do that breath work in the morning, and I am similar in the sense that I don't care for longer, really intense types of breathing. I really like, in for 4, out for 8, or box breathing or something like that. But I'm a huge fan of breath holds. So I'm glad you mentioned that too. If I can do something that is not too complicated and it has some breath holds, the first breath hold seems to be a little bit harder. And then I find that the second or the third gets easier. I don't know why that is.
Yeah. And some people are really good at holding the breath at the top, and then the retention, not so much. So I'm actually, if you want to learn more about the breath, there's a book called Breath. I can't remember something Nestor. It's a good book to actually read about. Yeah, that will actually really explain like all the different benefits of different types of breathing. And if you want to learn all about like the science, the nerdy stuff, go read that
Mhm.
book for sure.
But it's something that we can't see, just like stress. We can't see the impact, so we don't prioritize it. And like we talked about in the very beginning, we both know sleep is very important, but I'm definitely more diligent and more aware when I have the data showing me. And I correlate that. I feel amazing today because I got a great night's sleep. And this is why it's important for me to prioritize when my brain's like, maybe you should just stay up late and eat something and watch TV. And I'm not saying that you can't, I don't believe in living perfectly. And I love what you said about just being gentle with ourselves, because rigidity for me is not something I'm going to maintain. I don't want it to feel like that, but people think it needs to. And habit stacking is something I do with clients. Like, what's one little thing to where it doesn't feel so overwhelming? And their brain will say, but that's not enough. But if you're stacking each week, if you feel comfortable to add on, then you look back and all these things you're able to maintain because it was bite sized versus some drastic thing that felt too far out of your comfort zone. And so I also love that safety is something that you reinforce. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be safe. And yes, we have to step outside of that to grow, but there is a balance of being in the two places.
Totally. We don't heal if we're not anchoring in safety. So, yes, we want to push ourselves out of our comfort zone, but then we want to anchor in safety. That's actually how we work with our nervous system. It's that titration, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, super powerful. And one of the greatest benefits about regulating your nervous system is it'll change every single area of your life, every
Mm-hmm.
area, because your nervous system is your attachment system. So, when we work with our nervous system, we actually have the capacity to hold more in our life. So that's when we actually start being open to abundance, open to all the
Yeah.
relationships that we want in our lives, right? Like it's unbelievable how many people don't even realize manifestation. It's all connected to your nervous system. Your ability to manifest your desired reality is connected to your nervous system. So it's being
Mm-hmm.
able to be in that open, receptive, grounded place, then you're open to receiving. So, working with your nervous system and working with it in a gentle way, small, tolerable steps, anchoring in safety will actually allow more things to come into your life. You'll be able to hold more. Whereas, like, we live in this culture that's like, go, 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 always pushing, and we're actually pushing things away. We
Yeah.
think that we're getting somewhere, but it's just the hamster wheel. Like, you might be doing more, but you're not necessarily achieving more. Often, when we allow ourselves to actually rest and regulate our nervous system, then we actually have the capacity to hold more.
Absolutely. And what I have learned is that for increasing heart rate variability, it's not about the absence of all stress. It is, and people think that that's the goal. It's about how well do we respond to it? What is our recovery looking like? And the goal is not zero stress. I don't think we're going to grow if that is how we're living.
No, I love that you said that. That's one of the like the major misconceptions about working with the nervous system is it's not about always being calm all
Hmm.
the time. That's not a regulated nervous system. A regulated nervous system is having a flexible, pliable, malleable nervous system. So don't even get freaked out if you have an aura ring and there, you have days of high stress. Maybe your
Yeah.
HRV is lower, as long as like you can like bring it back into balance.
Hmm.
Right. So it's like it's about having a flexible, pliable, malleable nervous system to be able to move in of states of stress and then back into states of ventral calmness, flow, easily and more often. So, a regulated nervous system is spending more time in our ventral vagal state, which is a branch of our parasympathetic nervous system. It's when we feel calm, connected, grounded. It's spending more time there, but it's not always being there. We don't
Right.
always want to be calm. Like if you want to be able to, react properly in certain situations when you actually do need to activate your sympathetic nervous system, even when you're like, playing or like engaging with others, you're activating your sympathetic nervous system. So it's definitely not a bad thing experiencing stress in your life. It's how we grow.
Yeah, definitely. So I just wanted to elaborate on a few of the things that get me out of my head into my body. You mentioned moving the hips. So I think about hula hooping because it's fun. Moving the hips, I feel so silly, but dancing, that is something where I've gone to some breath work classes and I'm like, okay, I'm here for breath work, maybe a sound bath. And they're like, just get up and move your body however it feels right for you. And I'm like, yeah, what feels right for me is standing like a toy soldier. Like it makes me feel so uncomfortable to move my body freely. Like even that, I have no idea. So if I'm at home, maybe starting in a class like that wouldn't be the place. So at home, I put something on and I'm like, okay, what feels good to move my body? I'm laughing at myself, silently judging, but I'm like, I'm going to dismiss that thought and just get back to it. And so I had to work my way up to it. And sober dancing used to literally paralyze me. I would just look around and just kind of close my eyes and just hope that it was over. Almost like when you said you put your hands over your face, that was the feeling I had being asked to dance. So if someone is struggling with that, I would say, yeah, do it at home, hula hooping. It could be fun music that you like. It doesn't have to be even in a group if that feels better for you. And you said letting the body move organically. So for me, that's at home. And the last thing that really helps me is I just discovered it, but it is called Root Zen. It's from MitoZen, a company I use a lot of their suppositories and products. And it's an essential oil that goes on the root chakra, so on the perineum. And it feels cooling. It doesn't burn or anything like that. It does not go on the rectum, it goes on the perineum. And immediately I'm out of my head and my awareness is brought to that part of my body. And it's really cool because most mornings I'm thinking about all the things I have to do. I put that on and it brings my attention there. So that's a really easy way to bring your attention elsewhere. Some people use yoni eggs. I don't find that I had the same effect, but that was also supposed to bring attention to that place. So why is bringing attention to our body, specifically root chakra, if that's more about safety and sacral, if it feels very scary to be there, why is it good for me to practice being there? Or why would it be helpful for me to practice being there?
Yeah, somatic awareness exercises. There's so many incredible different exercises that can really help bring you out of your head into your body by just bringing awareness to different parts of your body, right? So, somatic awareness is the foundation that we need to actually build in order to actually be able to heal our nervous system. Like, if you don't actually have like somatic awareness, you haven't even built the foundation. Like, it all starts there, the foundational piece. So, even like all of those things that you said are absolutely incredible. Like even just simply starting to notice like your hands, your fingers. Like I get a lot of clients just to sit and focus on their hands. Just be present with your hands. And then you start noticing heat and tingling, start noticing your feet, like every limb of your body. And it feels silly sometimes at first, right? Like doing these different exercises. I'll even get them to go through every single limb of their body and even just say, like, this is my hand, it belongs to me. And that can actually even be a very emotional statement for some people to say because they're so disconnected from their
Mhm.
bodies and their body
Yeah.
boundaries. So, what we're actually doing is if you struggle to set boundaries in life, start practicing body boundaries. Bring awareness to your body, and setting body boundaries is all connected, right? So, when we actually feel stronger in our bodies, we actually feel more confident in life. When we're more grounded and anchored into our bodies, we actually have more confidence. It's all the foundation of somatic awareness. It just affects every single area of your life. Like it'll build your confidence, it'll improve your relationships, you'll feel more connected to others, you'll be more present, you'll be able to actually handle more stress in your life. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I like to think of awareness as the first step to change because we can't change something we're not aware of. And how might our attachment have to do with that? And what are we referring to when we talk about attachment styles or attachment wounds? If somebody's brand new to hearing about that, what does that mean and where does it come from?
Yeah. So attachment styles is my jam. And a lot of people don't know that attachment styles and the nervous system, polyvagal theory, go hand in hand. So you cannot understand attachment styles without understanding the nervous system and how the nervous system works. And many people are familiar with attachment styles because of the book called Attached, which is a great book, but really just introduced us to the different styles. And many people were like, well, I don't even know what to do with that after, right? How do I actually even work with that? Well, when you know how to work with your nervous system, you can actually heal your attachment wounds. So I'll very briefly, quickly go over what attachment is. So attachment is how we form bonds to ourselves, the environment, and others. Okay. So our attachment system, which is our nervous system, was actually formed primarily in the first couple of years, is when our attachment system is formed. So secure attachment is where we all want to be. That's known as our ventral vagal state. So that means we spend most of our time in our ventral vagal state. We feel connected to others. We feel confident, capable, able. We feel good in relationship and on our own. We're able to repair ruptures more quickly. So this is a state where we all want to be in. No one is completely secure, but there are unicorns out there that they spend most of their time in that ventral vagal state in secure connection. So then there is the anxious attachment. So anxious attachment is when we have anxiety about having our needs met. We have a lot of anxiety in relationships about being loved, about being lovable. And often this was due to having parents who were very unpredictable. So sometimes they were there, sometimes they were not. And so our attachment system spends a lot more time in sympathetic, in our fight or flight response. So then there is the avoidant, and I resonate with the avoidant. That is something that I've worked on healing. And the avoidant gets a bad rep because often people look at them as very cold, distant, and narcissistic. But the truth is, we all are wired for connection. We all want connection, right? So they just have difficulty opening up. And often this was due to having parents who were neglectful. And sometimes it's not necessarily our parents' fault. Sometimes they were dealing with a lot of trauma or
Sure.
they had like a lot of kids, right? So because sometimes it could be hard for people to actually look at because they don't want to put blame on our parents. And this is by no means blaming our parents, but we can't heal something if we're not willing to look at it and understand it. So their attachment system is deactivated, disconnected. So they are actually spend most of their time in dorsal, which is that immobility shutdown response. Often they spend a lot of time feeling dissociated, disconnected from their bodies, low energy, unmotivated, disconnected. This is also known as depression, right? When we're spending a lot of time in dorsal. And then there is the disorganized attachment, and that is from experiencing a lot of abuse growing up or in relationships. And that is our freeze response. So that's a blend of sympathetic and a blend of dorsal. So it's actually a very like painful place to be in. It's very contradicting thoughts, like really like push and pull thoughts. Like you want to move towards love, but at the same time you're scared and you want to pull away. So we can actually recognize this showing up. So just for an example, conflict is a really great way to look at how our nervous system responds because there is a lot of nuance, of course. Our nervous system can feel maybe more secure when it comes to like physical affection, but maybe we get more anxious or avoidant when it comes to conflict. But usually look at how you approach conflict, right? So usually one partner might be more anxious and one might be more avoidant. So often that partner who's more anxious wants to fix the situation right away. Like they have a fear of abandonment. They don't want to be abandoned. And then the avoidant feels like they're being smothered. So they want space. They need to like disconnect, pull away, they withdraw. So even just being awareness to like being aware to like how we respond to different situations. How do you respond to physical affection? Do you like close off and pull away and not like being hugged?
I
Right. Like
do.
that is, yeah, it's an
I
avoidant
do.
pattern. Yeah. And like there's just so many different areas to look at. One thing I get my clients to do is like write down all of like what do we want in relationships? Like what is a healthy relationship? We want attunement, present, physical affection. Like write down all the good things that you want. And it's like, well, how do you actually respond to all of those things if they were actually to come into your life? If someone were to be there, be fully present with you, like eye contact, what happens inside your body? How does your nervous system respond to that? So when we can actually start to heal those parts of ourselves, then we can actually open up to secure attachment. So it's a practice, right? We have to
Yes.
practice secure attachment. So that is the only way that we can actually heal our nervous system is by using these different tools and being aware of how our nervous system responds to these different things.
Yeah, I'm going to call myself out for a minute. And I share this because I hope it helps somebody realize I've been, religious about my sleep and biohacks and all of that stuff. And it's great. Just like you said, we're not against the tools that help, but the state that we're in makes a big difference. And when you were talking about if someone were to show you affection, what would you do? I get so uncomfortable. I get really uncomfortable. Um, and I guess I didn't really realize that. So you said if you wrote down all the things that you wanted and they were there. So one piece of me wants love and connection. The other piece of me is terrified because I'm like, oh, people are going to leave. That was a core belief that I had. So I would test people to see if they would leave. And then sometimes they would because I was testing them. So it was a lot of my own wounds getting in the way of love being there. Another example is because of my inability to say no sexually when I was younger. I was so young. I mean, I didn't most people say you can't consent at 14. I guess that is very true. And it made me feel that it was wrong to say no because of the pressure that I felt, whether it was actually there or just what I believed. And so it's like now I'm older and my wounded self is like, I get to say no. But what is that doing to my ability to connect with my partner today? So that's how I realized my shit was in the way of connecting with someone who does treat me well, who does respect me, who does have my back. And I can't even connect in that way because of old shit that I haven't healed. And you even said something that really stood out to me. Um, and I might not quote it exactly, but it's like sometimes the thing that sends us over the edge is because we haven't finished processing things. Do you remember saying that? Like there were things when you were in your breathwork class and you had that experience, it was like unresolved things. So sometimes when we have a response, it's disproportionate to the situation. Is it that, or is it just that our emotional bucket's full? We don't even realize it, and any little thing will send us over the edge. And I think that that's definitely been me. I have awareness of that, and I'm realizing how can I discharge some of that energy because it is still within me so that I can be the person I want to be. It's not always what I have to do. Sometimes it's what I have to let go of. And I think most people may not realize how important that is.
Yeah. And our nervous system, our attachment system is just a beautiful self-protective system that just wants to keep us safe. So when we have these responses, just know that it's a beautiful self-protective like response. Like there's nothing wrong with you. It actually makes so much sense that we're having this response. And we all have multiple inner parts, multiple inner children, if anyone's familiar with parts work or IFS work. So we have these parts that carry a lot of wounding. So maybe they have fears of abandonment, fears of rejection, fears of abuse, fears of betrayal. So when these parts get triggered, they actually step in and hijack our nervous system. And they're the
Yeah.
ones that bring us into either that fight or flight response or that shutdown response. So we actually have to work with that part before we can regulate our nervous system. So often it's just becoming aware of like, okay, is there another part that's present? Because often, if we're not in a space where we feel confident, calm, connected, have clarity, there's 8 C's. So look into the 8 C's of IFS work. If you're not in that space, then there's another part present. There's a younger part that's present. And often these parts are hijacking our nervous system. So sometimes we have to work with these parts. And these parts can show up in ways of they play different roles. Okay. So a part can play the role of a perfectionist, uh, overworker, workaholic, stern taskmaster. They can be overachievers. They can be caregivers. They can be alcoholics, addicts, like all these different parts that they play. They're just roles that they play, right? And these are the parts that are actually hijacking our nervous system and keeping us from connecting. So it's working with these parts, self-soothing them, giving them what they need because they all have a fear that fear needs to be released, and we need to actually give that part what they're actually searching for, and then also working with our nervous system. So this is how we heal our relationship patterns. Healing our relationship patterns is working with our younger parts and working with our nervous system.
Yeah, it makes me somewhat emotional even thinking about it. But I was asked to get a photo of myself when I was younger, and I broke out a box of photos, and I was just, I mean, it brought up so much for me. But I found one that I really felt connected to, and I have it on my fridge, and I think about some of the ways that I speak to myself. And I wouldn't speak to a client like that. I wouldn't speak to a friend like that. Why would I speak to myself like that? So I think having that visual was a reminder, like that part is still within me and I forget. And some of these patterns or the fears, perfectionism, let's use that as an example, or being extremely empathetic. So perfectionism, it meets a need. We want to do well. We're having high standards. That sounds great, or else we wouldn't do it. But is it actually serving us? So is it something that we learned? And once we realize, okay, this is how I'm showing up, I can let go of that. But first, we have to acknowledge it's showing up, but it meets a need. So is there a healthier way to meet that need? Trying
Yeah.
to think of an example, maybe even people pleasing. So a lot of people will say yes to other people, simultaneously saying no to themselves because it meets the need of, I don't want to deal with that conflict. And in the short term, I see the rationale, but long term, what conflict is that creating inside of a person? So that's a great example of a pattern or a trait that we might have, good intentions, but I don't know that it's serving us or the people around us. Because if we are saying yes to everybody else and then we decide to say no, they might feel like something's wrong. But I want the people in my life to say yes because it's truly a yes. And I want to feel that I can say no. And a lot of my relationships, I did not have that before. And I thought the only way to make a relationship work, even a friendship, would be some sort of betrayal to self that I didn't realize is betrayal to self. I'm just like, well, if you care, then who cares what you need? And I think a lot of people operate from that place and it leads to resentment. And I don't know how healthy it is.
Totally. We often have a fear of setting boundaries because we think that boundaries will cause disconnection, but it's the opposite. Boundaries are meant to bring us closer together. And
Yeah.
sometimes boundaries can feel like walls if we've never set them before, and that's okay. There's ways to just even practice doing them. There's a boundary sandwich that you can start like practicing. If you've never set a boundary before, if you struggle with that, I definitely struggled with that. But always just saying like a safety statement first,
Mhm.
then the boundary, and then the safety statement. But boundaries are meant to bring us closer together, and they will when they're done, in a healthy and a good way, in a conscious way. But sometimes they can feel like you're setting up walls at first, but that's how we learn, right? Like you have
Yeah.
to sometimes just step into it and then pivot and learn from that.
I always ask people if it feels like a wall, did you set that boundary from your breaking point? Did you set it from a place of frustration, a place of I'm at my breaking point? And how is that delivery going to be received? And, everyone has their own self-preservation and defense mechanisms. So when you really come at someone, hey, you're not going to do this, I don't know how well I'm going to receive that. And some people don't like, I call it the sandwich method, but I think that's helpful. You said a safety statement, I'll say just acknowledging the situation. Hey, I really care about you and our relationship. And it's important to me that we figure out things that will work for both of us. So that way, I'm not trying to be manipulative. I'm saying, we're here, we're on the same team. I just want to start with that. The boundary or the need would be, um, if I feel that I'm not able to come, would you be able to respect that? And then also asking the other person what they need and making sure it isn't, this is what I need, and their needs are not considered. So if both people can do that, I have found that conflict resolution in a healthier relationship does not lead to more conflict. It actually leads to more closeness and feeling like, okay, we get each other, and every conflict can lead to growth in a healthy relationship. Maybe not the first time, but eventually we get there. And that's been such a shift for me. I didn't realize that was possible. I thought boundaries mean I'm difficult. And maybe it did if I was saying it from that total place of just being at my breaking point. Maybe let's start to practice boundaries before we get to that place.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that you said that, how a lot of people don't like sometimes people think it's manipulative to like use these different like tools or like the boundary statement. And communication is a skill set.
Mhm.
Like that's why there's tools. The tools work, right? It's a skill set, and it will feel inauthentic at first. that's okay, because the more you practice it, it actually will start to feel more genuine and authentic. One of the best books that everyone should read is Getting the Love You Want by Dr. Hendricks. What is it? I don't know why I can't think of their name right now. Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt is what it is. One of the best books. And they have this Imago dialogue that they take their clients through, and it saves so many different marriages. And it's a script. And at first, their clients are like, what? I'm not going to be reading a script. This is so inauthentic. It just feels cheesy. But they practiced it and they kept practicing it. And then it started feeling authentic. And it made such a difference in their relationships. Because the thing is, it's like, sometimes we get too focused on being bold and being authentic that we're not actually delivering things in a way that's well received to other people. What's the point of sharing our message and being bold and authentic if we're not actually even helping anybody or creating more of a connection? Isn't this the whole point of being able to have, conversations about different, maybe controversial topics with people? If they're not being received, then you have to look at yourself too. It's not all about like your triggers or your responsibility. It's actually both. It's an interdependent relationship, is actually taking responsibility for helping that other person heal too. So it's like we live in a very polarized society that is so focused on hyper independence. And oh, you're triggered, that's your problem. It's like, well, no, maybe you actually delivered it in the wrong way, right? Like absolutely their emotions are their responsibility. Yes, that is their responsibility, but it's also our responsibility to actually practice on delivering things in a way that's well received and learning how to actually communicate, right? Because we are not going to evolve or get anywhere if we don't actually learn how to do that. That's been a lesson for me, like a big one that I practice, because the thing is, it's like the world has been so polarized over the past few years, right? So polarized. Well, we're not getting anywhere by just being more polarized. It's just a lot of people reacting from their wounds. Either one person is projecting or one person is deflecting, right? It's not getting us anywhere. So it's like we all have to start to really look at how we're delivering things and how we're receiving things.
I love that you said that. And a great example is, and I don't take credit for this, but communication is like playing baseball. You can throw the ball, you can deliver your message, but if their mitt's not up, like, are they going to receive the message? So is the person in receiving mode? Are they in the middle of doing something? And you're like, well, I told them. Were they in receiving mode? Did you ask, I'd like to discuss XYZ with you, and it's not like you need to walk on eggshells, but sometimes if it's something that's very important to you, maybe when they're on the toilet wouldn't be the right time. So we need to make sure that the person's in receiving mode, that we're delivering a message that they can catch, not that we're sugarcoating it, but that they understand that the intention is to get on the same page and to make the relationship better. And if you lead with that, I'm more willing to receive the message versus if it feels like an attack, because the message is the same, but the delivery changes the meaning of the message for a lot of people.
Oh, I love that you said that. It's going in with, what is the goal here? Is your goal to trigger someone? Or is your
Be
goal
right.
to actually, right? Exactly. To be right and to trigger someone. So it's like knowing what your goal is. Is it meant to bring us closer together and actually be able to see nuances and to be able to see other person's perspectives and, come into a place of connection? Then obviously you're going to be delivering that message in a different way. And none of us are perfect. I myself,
You're not
on
perfect?
a regular it's something that I continuously have to work on, because difficult conversations were really hard for me in the past, but it's something I've really practiced and it's made a big difference in my life.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because I'm not perfect either. And I think because of Instagram, because of seeing, I try to show up messy. I try to show up when I'm sad. I try to show up and show all of it. And a lot of the people that work with me say that they work with me because they feel I'm not going to judge them, because I'm so open about the fact that I'm not perfect. And once we realize we don't have to defend what we're doing, we can let that go and then start to dive in. But a lot of us will defend or justify things because realizing that we may have had a role is not always easy for people. And going back to the parents thing, I'm not here to blame either of my parents. They have their own things going on, and it's never to blame. I hope that when people make these connections about their childhood, they better understand their parents. They understand why they were or were not able to give them the love that they need. And it doesn't mean anything about you. It may be that they had their own stuff. And there's not a lot of people, or at least back then, not a lot of people talking about this stuff. So we were taught just suck it up, keep going. But like, how much could a parent take until they're at their breaking point? And then what might their delivery be like how would that affect a child? And they might think, oh, it's not safe for me to do all of that. So by turning the light on and looking at our role, our parents' role, hopefully it can help us all understand each other better versus blame and needing to be right. I don't think that that's helpful.
No, it's meant to like you're meant to have more empathy for your parents when you actually do this work, right? And of course,
Yeah.
there's certain situations that were very dysfunctional and chaotic, and there was a lot of pain involved in, for some people. And it's not, of course, honor that
Mhm.
and, sit with that and be with that. And it's totally okay to actually feel, to validate the emotions that are coming up. If there's anger is not a bad emotion. Let the anger move through you, experience the anger. Often we can't come to a place of acceptance and forgiveness until we fully process these emotions first. But yeah, it's really meant to just have more empathy. I have so much empathy for my parents, right? Like
Yeah.
I have such a
Same.
great relationship with my parents because of this work, but it was not like that before at all, right? So, yeah, and it can be really painful to start to look at these parts of ourselves and see how we show up like wounded. It can be very like confronting, but there's so much healing involved. It's like a weight lifted off your shoulders when you realize that you don't have to show up perfect. Like people want to relate to you. That's why people love following you and love your work is because it's relatable and they feel connected. They don't feel judged, right? No one wants
Mhm.
to show up to like a coaching call and feel like I'm so scared that my coach is going to judge me and I don't want to actually tell them the truth. It's like we like, yeah, people need to stop putting coaches on a pedestal. Like we are just human. Like everyone else. We have flaws. We make mistakes. We're on this path. We're dedicated to bettering ourselves. We're dedicated to growth. We have the tools that we've learned over the years, but we're still human. We still have flaws, just like everybody else.
Yeah. And being honest about that, as a nurse, I'm not really supposed to do that. You're not allowed to share anything. And it does make a person feel like they're really struggling. And I'll never forget, there was a time I was with a psych patient. I don't even like to use that label, but a woman dealing with psychiatric issues. And she was suicidal and had an attempt. And so she had to have a sitter with her, and she felt so much shame. And um, I wish I could have told her, I've been where you've been, not in a way where I would take my life, but I've been in a place where I wasn't allowed to be unsupervised for 3 days when I was 18 because they were worried about my well being and all of that. And I judged myself so much for that. And I think step one is just acceptance. We don't have to like where we are today, but just accepting this is where I am. Who I am is a series of repetitive things that I've learned that have shaped my personality. And by having awareness, I can begin to let go of that. But any conversation we have, any problem solving, I think our state makes a big difference. If I'm in a very reactive state, not so effective when I try to resolve something with my partner. But when I have an exercise I do from Orpheus. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's really, really good. You do it when you're supercharged. And in 12 minutes, I feel just so much peace. It's like a express EMDR. That's almost what it feels like to me. By changing my state and then having that conversation, he was able to hear what I was saying. So maybe you're valid, or a person listening, maybe you're valid in what you're feeling, and it's always valid what you're feeling. But is that affecting your ability to deliver the message so that you can have your needs heard?
Yes. Yeah. Because sometimes we just need space. Like there's nothing wrong with asking for space. If you're highly emotional, it's probably not the best time to have these conversations. Go be with that emotion, like and let it move through you. Then you can actually regulate your state and see clearly, right? Because often
Yes.
we're just being hijacked by our emotions and nothing ever goes well when we're in that state.
Yeah, and just asking our partner, what was conflict resolution like in your family? So my boyfriend, he's open about this, but they would stay together and hash it out. And then eventually they'd get so exhausted and they all made up. And for me, I don't do well with a charge or a loud voice. I'm like, I got to step away. I will always come back and have the conversation. So I think it's unfair when someone like myself needs space. You don't communicate that. You just go away. The other person's like, hey, are we figuring this out or not? But through grounded communication and couples therapy, we've been able to realize that's just what I need, not because I don't care, because I do care. And I don't want to say something that I don't mean because I'm not in control of my emotions right now. So that was big for him to realize, oh, okay, this doesn't mean she doesn't care. It means she does. It's just not the way that I'm used to experiencing that.
Absolutely. Yeah, because often if we have more of that avoidance style, we do need space. But the other person who's more anxious needs reassurance because they feel like they're being
Right.
abandoned. So it's like just saying, hey, I need space right now, but I am coming back. right? Just that simple safety statement. I love that you even mentioned couples therapy. Like when I'm not in a romantic relationship, I can tell you when I enter a relationship, I would enter therapy right away.
We
I think
did.
like
Yeah.
therapy is so
Yeah.
healthy, and it's crazy that our culture looks at it like there's something wrong with you. I think the healthiest relationships are in therapy. I work with a therapist and it's completely changed my life to have someone to have that relationship with and just to be a sounding board and to actually help be aware of my patterns.
Yeah.
Therapy is something that I'm always going to invest in because it's been so helpful.
And it helps for us to have a translator, and it's a neutral place where sometimes I'm not hearing because I'm so irritated, and she's able to be that translator. And sometimes it's a little messier, but it has always gotten us to better understand each other. One thing I wanted to show you, and if you're watching on YouTube, maybe the editor can include it. Have you seen this picture from Burning Man?
I have, yeah.
I never went to Burning Man. I don't know if that would be my thing, but I really love it. If you haven't seen it, maybe we'll be able to show you in the video. But it's two children looking at each other, facing each other, and they're inside of these cages that are shaped like adult bodies. And so this is so powerful. I actually got this printed out. We have it in our house. And we had it in our hallway to our bedroom because normally that's where I would go when I was irritated. And I would see that. And I'm like, hold on. I know I'm feeling this way. And it's okay that I'm feeling this way. But my inner child is pissed off or hurt or something. And at the end of the day, we just want to connect and we can't. And we're scared that this means we're going to not be together or whatever. It was just such a good reminder. And I think a lot of people operate like this and don't even realize it. Their backs are to each other. There's so much resentment that's built up. It's not even worth communicating. They don't even listen anyway. I mean, that's a problem that a lot of people have accepted as normal, I guess.
Totally. I often say to my clients, I'm like, would you let a 5-year-old cut your hair or drive your car? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, they're making all your major life decisions for you. They
Well
they
said.
are, right? Like our inner child is making our decisions for us from a place of fear. So I love that
Yeah.
picture.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And anything that's in my environment that's going to remind me, even the background of my phone, I changed that to be something that is reminding me because it's feeding my subconscious. So, how does a person change? How does a person change if who we are is learned? What's going to create that? We might have already touched on it, but
Yeah. And I mean, of course, there's so many different steps and so many areas to like really look at. But the first step, again, is always just foundations. I always start with somatic awareness, building body awareness. Once we get there, then we can actually start to uncover our relationship patterns, our attachment patterns. And then we can start to actually learn to work with our nervous system and navigate our nervous system. Then once we learn that, then we learn about our parts, our inner children, our inner parts, and how they work and how they play a role. So what we're doing when we like integrate like the somatic work with the parts work is we are really integrating these younger parts. And often people think that when we start to do this internal work, they get scared that they're going to lose motivation or that it's going to change their life in a drastic way or they're going to lose people. No, it will not. Like you will actually have more motivation. Things
Mhm.
will flow more easily in your life, right? So what we're doing is we're not getting rid of any parts. So all these parts that are present, whether it's a perfectionist, a caretaker, a workaholic, like you're not going to be any less motivated or less caring. You're just going to uncover more of their positive qualities. And the ones that aren't really serving you will start to relax because they won't need to hold on to such strong roles because you'll be leading with your core self. So your core self is your inner parent, right? So that's really, I mean, to simplify it, it's actually pretty complex and nuanced when you actually to dive into this work. But really, it's just building somatic awareness, working with your attachment system, your nervous system, and working with your inner parts to heal.
Not just once though. You have to do it multiple times.
Totally. Yeah, it's a lifelong practice and it's not something that you ever stop doing. Like I'm always engaging in the work. And if I even start to, and it not to sound that like we're always broken, we need to be fixed, but
Mhm.
it's something to always be aware of. We're always growing. New parts are going to show up in different types of relationship dynamics. So it's constant. Like we're always in the process of healing. I don't know anyone that's enlightened personally. So we're here to be in relationship with others, and in relationship is how we heal. So
Yeah.
relationship is a spiritual path.
I also love that you said not broken, because we're not broken. Even when my body it felt pretty broken. That was a story I was telling myself. It was actually letting me know that this was not sustainable anymore. So it wasn't broken. It was working quite well. And our brains sometimes will think, oh, they're not working because I have negative thoughts. Well, it's working quite well because it's there to keep us safe. So realizing that every message, every thought that we have may not actually be true, and sitting with that can be very helpful. And it is slow, gradual changes. And when we say the work doesn't end, it just means that we get better. And then you want to be better. And it doesn't feel like work. It feels like growth. It feels like expansion. It feels like I really get to have all the things that I want in life. I have a career where I feel like I help people in a much more meaningful way. I get to lead by example. And what it really required was letting go of all of the shit that I was carrying that led me to be so tense. And the more that I do that work, the more things really fall into place for me. And so I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned in help. Yes, biohacks, yes, sleep, yes, all of that. But if you're not conscious of your state, I don't know how much you're going to get out of it, including with food. You might eat this beautiful meal that you've spent hours making, but if you're in fight or flight, you're really going to be getting the nutrition you need from that. So it's one of the most important things. And I'm so grateful that you're able to share and do this work, because not to say that doctors are not intelligent. I think they really are. And I think they care, and you get into that industry, but it's so much more meaningful when someone has gone through it and can relate. And as coaches, we can do that. We can say, I'm not here to judge you for your negative thoughts or anything like that. That's where you're starting. It's okay. And showing people love instead of like forcing them to change. I think that was a big thing that really stuck out to me from this that has worked well. I'm not a rigid coach. I don't think that that's helpful.
Right.
And if someone can't say no to me as their coach, then how are they going to say no in their waking life? So I always give people choices. And I think a lot of people struggle because they're doing too much because they don't know how to say no. And it goes with worth and all that. So this sounds like something that could help a lot of different people. And I know that we're getting to the end of the podcast, but I'll share how people can find you. But is there any major takeaway that you want people to have from this episode? Anything that people may not realize, but you really want to hammer it home?
Yeah, I mean, I think the same message was what you had just said earlier. Like, you aren't broken and you actually make perfect sense. When you have these experiences in life, in your relationships, if you feel very reactive, very dysregulated, your nervous system is so intelligent. Like, your nervous system is this beautiful self-protective system that is just working to keep you safe. We just have to show it that it's safe, not tell it that it's safe. That's how we work with our nervous system. And your nervous system creates your entire reality. The state of your nervous system creates your entire reality. So when you work to actually heal your nervous system, then your entire life actually starts to change.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the foundational piece that maybe I saved for the end, but I'm realizing that's the thing that's going to move the needle the most for me. And at first I just thought it was bullshit, honestly, because I didn't learn about it in nursing school. But then after 2020, I realized a lot of the things that I learned in nursing school, not to say that they're wrong, but there was a lot more to it. There's a lot more to it. So when you work with people, what does that usually look like, and how can people find you if they're interested in working with you?
Yeah. So right now, I have a community called Waking the Wild Woman Community, where I take them through a whole online training on a lot of the different things that we just discussed today. And we have a community of women. So you can work with me there. You can also work with me through Kaylor Betts Academy, Awake and Winning Academy. And then also you can take the somatic breathwork practitioner training. I'm a mentor in that training. So those are the three ways that, yeah, you can work with me. You can find me on Instagram at the Alyssa Stefanson.
Amazing. Is there any website that I should include too?
wakingthewildwoman.com.
Okay, great. I just love all that you're doing. I've heard you on Kaylor's podcast. Well, the podcast you two are doing together, but I'm really excited to check out yours, because even being in your energy on this podcast, I do feel that you're very grounded. And that's why I reached out to you, because like, wow, I think about my role models and I think about the people. Maybe I don't like everything about them, but I'm like, that is so beautiful. And I would like to embody that in my own way. And that's when I saw you, I was like, that is something I'd like. And sounds like you're not perfect. You're not 100% there, but there could have been a point where after all you went through in that relationship, where you let it mean this is it for me, or I'm never going to find love or something like that. And I just don't hear that. You use this, and fuck yes, because when we can take our pain and show people that it can be the best thing that happened to us, it's so liberating. And I feel no shame for my mistakes because it shows other people it's safe to be human. And those mistakes don't have to mean that that's who you are. But we do have to be honest with ourselves. And I see that in you. So I'm just so grateful for you being here today. And it meant a lot. So I hope listeners, you enjoyed this episode too. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and leave a review, ideally a 5-star review if you loved it. All of this is free of charge and really helps me to be able to run the podcast. If you take a screenshot and tag me, I'll repost you and shout you out on Instagram. So tag Ashley Taylor Wellness and High Maintenance Hippie podcast. If you have any feedback or guests that you'd like to have, I would love to hear from you so that I'm not just talking at you. I really want to deliver things that are valuable. So send me an email with any feedback, suggestions, or ideas for guests at ashley@ashleytaylorwellness.com. And I will leave you with a disclaimer. Please know that this is not medical advice or replacement for seeking medical care. Everything discussed on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Always consult with your medical provider before making any changes. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.